Can you hear
Hi,
me?
Carol. Yep.
Yes, and I was just going to let you know, I will hold off on starting the recording. I'm going to stop it real quickly now. Hi, everybody. It's about 6 minutes till the hour, so we've still got a little bit before we get started. But I hear that there may be a challenge with our audio, so I want to make sure that you're all able to hear me. So if anybody that's on can raise their hand just to let me know you're able to hear, that would be great. Thank you, Art. That is much appreciated. And Keisha, I see that you're typing a response. Wonderful. Thank you so much, guys. We'll get started in just a few minutes. I'm so glad that you're with us today. Good afternoon or good morning, depending where you're joining us from. I'm so glad that you are joining us for today's webinar. This is Patricia Levitt at the National Center for Families Learning. I'm the team leader for family learning, particularly for Toyota Family Learning. So I'm very glad that you're all with us, and also that our evaluators from Penn State are with us as well. Today we will get a chance to kind of dig into some of the evaluation results from last program year. And I think there are some reminders maybe at the end of today's presentation. With that, Carol, I'll let you go in and take it away so you have plenty of time.
Okay, great. Can you hear me? Patricia, you can just answer, I think.
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Okay, good. All right, so thank you so much, Patricia, and thanks everybody for joining us today. It's really wonderful to have the opportunity to learn about your work and all of the great things you're doing for families around the country. You want to push the next slide, Patricia? So Tabitha and I are going to highlight some of the key findings from the annual report for 2016-17, and we're also going to give you some time to ask some questions and have some discussion at the end. And I'm going to turn it over to Tabitha, who's going to start us off. So next slide, please.
Great, thank you so much. So hopefully everyone can hear me as well. I'll defer if you can't. Hopefully someone will chime in. So just first to look at some numbers of what you all achieved. If you're feeling tired from the last program year, it's well earned because you guys put in a lot of different hours. Just looking at totals here, we had 13 different programs across the country operating 34 different sites. And you served 694 different participants within those different sites. And over all of those individuals, they accrued over 90,000 hours of attendance hours, which is not too shabby for a year's work. So just to kind of give you a comparison with the program data from last year, there were 17 different programs across the country, and they had about 114,000 different hours, which shakes out to about 6,700 hours per program. This year, although there are less programs participating and a few less hours, it shakes out to about 7,300 hours per program. So even though there are less programs, you guys are putting in on average more hours with these different areas: the parent education, the ABE ESL, the family service logs, and then the parent and child timer packed. So well done. So next slide. Thank you. There were many initial and final interview conducted. Just to give you a quick basis of the numbers, we had 666 initial interviews and 455 final interviews, which was a difference about 32% of individuals dropping off. Next slide. You guys filled out close to 4,000 logs and interviews, or overall surveys in Survey Gizmo. So if you're tired of looking at those slides again, if you're tired of looking at those surveys again, well earned, because you guys did it a lot. So we had close to 4,000 logs completed. The most commonly filled out were those home activity logs. We had over 2,000 of those activity logs filled out, which is about 200 logs per program. So next slide. I wanted to highlight some of the different service learning projects. So you each reported a variety of projects that were done, and I just wanted to pull out a couple that were listed for each, so you guys can kind of read through and see the myriad things that each program tackled on the different ways they were interacting with their community. There were the 13 different programs, and we had 87 different projects happening. So if you want to go to the next slide. So these are just a few more, a few more looking at the latter half of the alphabet. So we had some of the larger programs completing as many as 24 projects in the last program year. So we had some great reporting done and great descriptive data from all of these service learning projects that you guys sent us information on. Next slide. So Carol's going to go more in depth on what the family mentoring logs looked like, but just to kind of give you an overview, we had 2,548 individuals surveyed with these family mentoring logs, and exactly 850 of these families reported that they had met with another Toyota family learning family outside of class, and that's about a third of participants that reported that in the previous week they had met with another group. Next slide. Okay, so that was just an overview of some of the great work that you guys were doing and what was accomplished in the last year. Now we're going to wade in a little bit deeper into what the report that we compiled said, and we'll start out by looking at demographics. So the first slide, if you want to go, thank you. First up was looking at the racial demographics that we had. And now this is all looking at the initial interviews. Similar to previous years, the largest racial category served was identified as Hispanic or Latino, Latina. Overall, though, the percentage of people identifying as Hispanic or Latino, Latina decreased from previous program years. So the last year it was 77% in 2015, 2016, and this year it was 70%. We did see an increase in two categories. So the second largest is white or Caucasian, and that is similar to previous years. But the largest increase that we saw in percentage points was actually Black or African Americans, which increased from 14% in 2015-16 to, oh, it's not even on there. It increased from 14% the previous program year to 24%. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we had participants from 33 different countries and 6 continents. We were a little low on representation from Antarctica, but other than that, we had representation across the globe. The majority of participants were from Mexico, but the largest change we saw from previous program years was an increase in the U.S.-born participants within the programs, and that went up to 26% on the last program year versus the 17% the year before. So a fairly large jump over the last program year. Next slide. So by far the most commonly spoken languages from our program participants were Spanish and English. So we had, we did see a change in the number of people speaking English as a native language. In 2015, 2016, it was 19%, and this last program year, it went up to 26%. However, by far the most commonly spoken native language is Spanish. And just to give a sense of the gap, I did list some other languages that were indicated on the surveys, but Spanish was the most commonly spoken language, English the second most commonly spoken language, and Creole was the third most spoken language, and that came in at just about 3%. So there's a large gap between the most commonly, second most commonly, and third most commonly spoken languages of participants. Next slide. So the initial and final interviews ask the respondents, what is the highest grade or year of school completed? So we're looking for not just that they started, but what did they actually complete? About 1/3 of participants indicated that their highest grade level completed was somewhere in kind of the middle school years. They were from 6th grade to 9th grade. And about 20% of respondents indicated that they had finished high school or they had obtained their GED. One thing that I found was kind of interesting was that we had a representation of people who indicated they had completed post-secondary. And if you see on the graph there, there's a little asterisk next to that. This is taken from our report. And we defined it, the post-secondary, as including technical school, 2-year degree, 4-year degree, or graduate school. We had about 3% of respondents indicate that they had completed some kind of post-secondary education. This program year, we saw the smallest number of participants indicate that they had had no schooling at all. The highest that we had percentage-wise of no schooling was in the 2013 and 2014 program year, the first year and the first kind of cohort. And there was about 6% of respondents said that they had had no schooling. This past year, it was less than 2%. I think it was 1.7%. Who indicated no schooling. So we're seeing a drop off in the individuals who have had no schooling whatsoever. Next slide. So employment status, we asked individuals whether they were working or not, and then we followed up with how many hours were those who indicated they were employed, how many hours were they working. The majority of respondents, 63%, said that they were not currently involved. Now this is on par with previous years. The last program year in 2015-2016, 67% of individuals indicated they were unemployed. So pretty similar across the years. The number or percent of individuals who indicated they were working at least part-time is 32%. And then we have a breakout on the pie chart on the right of how many hours per week of that 32%. The largest percent of working individuals were individuals working full-time or close to full-time, 36 to 40 hours a week. And that was about 30% of those employed, or 9% of respondents in total. Next slide. So one question that we ask on the initial and final interviews is what participants' yearly income is. Now, it's important to note for this slide that the highest percentage of people are those who said they prefer not to respond at all to this question. So these numbers are based on a total N that takes out those 120 individuals who didn't want to answer questions on their income. So instead of the 666 participants in total, we're looking at a total of 511 participants. And of those, the largest percent of respondents actually indicated that they live on less than $5,000 a year. Approximately of those 511 that answered this question, about 23% of people answered that they were living in less than $5,000 a year. The 2017 poverty threshold is $24,600 for a family of 4. And we found that 74% of respondents were making that or less over the year. And that's an increase from the previous program year, where just about 2/3 of the respondents indicated they were living at that poverty threshold.
Next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the data from the initial and final interviews. And you can do next slide, please. So this slide really represents, essentially retention. 2/3 of the participants are retained overall. And I think you'll want to look at your individual rates to see what how you're doing on retention. This is information on who fills out the initial interview compared to who completes the final interview. So it's not a direct retention rate, but it's the closest information that we have to looking at persistence. Next slide, please. In terms of literacy activities that were reported, again, I think as in other years, more literacy interaction is happening across the sites. Close to 1/3 of the participants engaged in some type of literacy activity with their child every day. That's either reading with the child or listening to a child read. 12% of participants indicated that they listened to their child read. Well, let me restate how to do this one. Not reading or doing any literacy activity with the child dropped to 3%. So it's increasing. It's another way to look at increasing literacy activities with children. And then the vast majority of participants in the final interview, 85%, did some kind of interactive literacy with their child, either read a story or helped them with homework or helped their children learn something new. So things are positively changing. Next slide, please. And then again, in technology use, there was an increase in parents using technology with their children. And in terms of communicating with their children, this increased from 37% to 58% in the final interview. Accessing the school website changed from 48% to 68%, and a big jump accessing educational websites changed from 33% to 68%. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about what we learned from the employability survey. There are 10 different questions within the initial and final interviews on employability. The questions ask participants to rate the frequency of certain activities on a scale from 0, something they never do, to 10, something they always do. Across the 10 questions, the majority of individuals are doing sometime, they responded sometimes to the employability questions in 6 of the 10 questions. And in the final interviews, they showed an overall increase in the rankings, like they're doing things more across over the year. Next slide, please. So there were some decreases in their rankings, and we don't know why this is. Maybe they're understanding more about problem solving, so they or more critical of their own skills in terms of problem solving. That can certainly happen. But in terms of question number 2, I'm good at solving problems, their rankings went down. Question number 2, I asked for help when my ideas or plans for solving a problem do not work. These are the only 2 that had smaller number of participants indicate always in the final interview than in the initial interview. But again, as I say, it's probably because they just are more realistic about what they're doing. Next slide, please. Some notable increases in employability skills on question number 4, which asked them if they ask for help when my ideas or plans for solving a problem do not work. There was an increase in participants in the rankings of 7s and 8s on this question. Question number 6, when I work with other people, I share my ideas and plans about how to organize or carry out a project or task at work. More participants indicated 8s and 10s on this question in the final interview. And then on question number 10, I understand how the different parts of the Toyota Family Learning Program are related to one another. There was an increase in participants indicating 10s, the highest ranking. And this really shows that they're starting to understand systems level thinking and operation, because there's a lot of different pieces in the Toyota Family Learning Project. So they're starting to see, we think, that how things work together, and how a family service learning project is supported by what they're doing in the ABE class, things like that. Next slide, please. So we asked questions about goal setting, and one of them is related to the GED. 153 individuals that earned their GED over the course of the program year actually said that they had, in the final interview, 34% of the interviewees, or people who completed the interview, had set the goal of the GED. So 153 individuals earned a GED, and we get that information from the final interview, where people tell us whether or not they set that goal and got the GED. The highest ranking learning goal, as always, I think this is highest every year, and it has been for years and years of anybody asking people in family literacy programs about this question, is to become a better teacher to their children. 96% of the individuals with the final interview achieved this goal. 86% of the participants ranked getting a better job as an important or very important goal, and 39% indicated that they achieved this in their final interview. All right, next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about the family mentoring logs and the home learning logs, what we learned from them. Next slide, please. So programs completed 2,689 home learning logs, or 4 logs per initial interview completed. The logs indicated that mothers were the most involved in home and literacy and engaged in activities with their children. In terms of the family, the order of respondents in the home learning logs of doing literacy activities with others in the children in the home. Mothers are number 1, fathers are number 2, siblings are number 3, and grandparents are number 4. But there's a big difference between mothers and the rest of these fathers, siblings, or grandparents. In fact, for every one father that read to their children, 2.4 mothers were reading to their children. So mothers are doing most of the interaction with their children around literacy activities. And then 65% of the home learning logs indicated that a mother had volunteered at school, which is really good. That's good, in good involvement. And only 15% indicated that the fathers were volunteering. So on average, I think, no, I don't, never mind. I already said that. Do you remember Rosanna Dana? Anyway, that shows my age. Next slide, please. So just to kind of set some context for this data, this is based on the question, did it, in their family mentoring logs, it's based on the question that did they meet with another family the prior week to responding to this log. So 850 family mentoring logs reported that the participant's family met with another family outside of class or program time. That's out of 2,500 plus. I think Tabitha says it's like 205,048 logs total. So this represents, this 850 responses represents more than 1,500 hours of times that they've spent with other families. That's the week prior to completing the log. Participants were most likely to meet at their program location or in another participant's home or their own home. I don't know if it's another or their own home. It could be somebody's home. And then the majority of families that did some family mentoring prior to the week before met on average 2 hours across the families. All right, next slide, please. So it's time for your questions and comments and discussion. I hope you've been keeping track of them. Any questions? And I don't know that we can see people's hands or chats, Patricia. So if you see, if anybody puts anything in the chat.
I don't see anything yet, and I don't see any hands, but we have everyone muted at the moment. If someone has a question and wants to speak, if you just raise your hand, then I'll unmute you, or you're welcome to type in the question box as well. I know sometimes that takes a minute, especially if you're formulating thoughts about what you've heard so far and want to ask your questions. So we'll give you a minute on that, and Carol, I'll let you know anything that I see come in.
All right. Anybody at NCFL have any questions? Any in the meantime?
And just to
I have a question. I have a question from Development Centers. Keisha says that it looks like some of the numbers for DCI might be a little low, and she wants to know if those are all of the families.
Do you want to go back to, is that the slide on attendance? Is that slide number 3 that?
Let me scroll back up. Sorry, everyone, if I'm making you dizzy scrolling that quickly. I was using the scroll wheel and realized how quickly it was moving.
Are you meaning the attendance hours? Are you meaning the number of logs? What numbers are you looking at? Are they muted again, or?
Looks. She says the number of logs and maybe some of the attendance.
So the attendance numbers are based on, and this is a great little plug for sending in, attendance each month. The attendance numbers on this particular slide, number 3, are taken from the Excel spreadsheet that programs send in every year, every month. And so basically we go through, and the numbers that you're reporting on those Excel spreadsheets are compiled into totals for these different categories, because every month there's a category for, parent education hours. There's a total for family service logs, and it's divvied up by participant. And so at the end of the year, once all those sheets come into me, I go through and report on whatever numbers are on those attendance sheets. So if it's not on those attendance sheets, then it's not represented on this particular log. In terms of the logs completed, those numbers are pulled directly from Survey Gizmo. So things like the final interview.
That would be slide 5, Patricia.
So those numbers are pulled directly from Survey Gizmo. We go in and we see, okay, from the final interviews, how many people answered, question number 1 with, well, the participant was a participant from developmental centers. And those are where we get those numbers. So it's based purely off of the Survey Gizmo data collected.
So we can go back and check the numbers.
Sure.
And so Tabitha can go back now. No, we'll go back and check the numbers and just make sure they're right.
Yes.
Errors can be made. We don't.
The other thing is that the logs do get closed at some point when we start doing our data analysis, and so it's everything that was submitted to us second week of June. I'm not remembering the exact date, but it's generally within the first 10 days of June. We send out an announcement that we're closing the interviews and closing the logs down, and then we start doing our data analysis. So anything after that is not captured.
Sorry, ladies, if it's okay for me, speaking from a purely non-independent evaluator standpoint, I also, Keisha, I think it's important for you to note, and you might want to follow up with Andrea to make sure that I'm telling you the correct cohort number, but because, and for everyone else on as well, so there are some little spaces where things may be a little different for a couple of programs who are doing this model, but we're not technically Toyota Family Learning grantees. So Keisha, the way that your cohorts were set up for Say and Play with Words, it was like an offset so that you guys didn't start at the exact time that that Toyota Family Learning started. So I want to say that this does not include your cohort 4 participants maybe. You could check with Andrea to make sure that I didn't just tell you the wrong cohort number, but I think that's also probably part of why you're going to see lower numbers here, because it did not have all of your families. But I totally agree with Tabitha's plug about making sure for everyone across the board, making sure that those attendance hours are in and on time and complete. Especially sometimes I think people forget to log family service learning that's outside of the other components, as well as if you think it's possible that you may not be getting logs in, if for anyone, if you look at this data and you think, that's not what I expected, if you are still participating in the evaluation this year, so cohort 3 and Tupelo, absolutely let us know if you feel like you may not be getting as many completion PDF emails. Those should be going to a point person at each partner organization. If you're not getting those for one, or you think you might not be getting all of them, make sure that you check in. And Tabitha and Carol, I know you're going to be super glad for me to volunteer you for this, but it's very easy to look and see how many have gone through, and also to see if you have a lot of partials hanging out there, because sometimes that does happen especially if you have kind of spotty internet access, or you've got participants doing them on their phones. Sometimes there may be a blip in the internet just at the right second that they get to the end, but it's not like that submit moment, and so it does not actually go in. So if you don't receive the confirmation on it, definitely it's a good idea to check that if it's really been received, so that does get counted. Things like that all happen all the time, and that's just the world of internet. So I hope that that's not too much volunteering you there, Tabitha, but that's a pretty quick check.
Yes, and actually the last slide of the presentation, there is one other slide that we want to go over after we field some questions, but the last slide of the presentation does have our emails. So please, if something doesn't look right, if the numbers feel off, if you're not getting notifications, please let us know, because it's easier to fix now than when we're looking at literally thousands of logs at one time. So please don't hesitate to reach out to both Carol and I, and if you make sure to send the email to both of us, that way we can make sure that all bases are covered.
Perfect. I do have another question in the question box. How significant is it that the results show that participants are beginning to have an understanding of systems? Does this translate to a higher level of employability skills?
Well, I don't know how you're using the word significant, because in research that has a particular meaning. So
Okay.
there's so statistically there's no significance. We don't run that kind of statistic. It's a finding that is from qualitative analysis, very, very important. And the actual question, right, is, here's what we asked families. I understand the different parts of the Toyota Family Learning Program: child education, parent education, family mentoring, family service learning, adult education are related to one another. So,
So what we saw was an increase in people who were ranking 9s and 10s, and 10 is that they, always are feel like they completely understand that, and 9, that they fairly well understand that. And we saw an increase in that. And we also saw a decrease in the people who were saying, overall that they really didn't understand how the different parts work together. Now, that's the question itself. So we're doing a little bit of inference as to what does that really mean. There are several different kind of parts that comprise family literacy or family learnings in general, but the Toyota Family Learning Programs in specific. And so it's connecting the ways different activities really work together for specific objectives, like becoming a better parent to their child, or those other goals that they've set for themselves. Now, this is kind of a complex thing to start networking those ideas, and it's helpful because so often we're doing different tasks that engage us in different systems, like your child's education and filling out, that field trip permission form to go to the museum, and how does that contribute to your child's learning. I mean, being able to network different concrete activities together within one system really helps people get a better holistic view of how certain discrete activities really are helping them achieve longer term goals.
But this is just really an indication that they may be understanding systems. So, it's like the first step in trying to unpack whether or not, they understand this system. So it's important because, there could be a lot of people who still, after finishing the program, don't really respond, improve their understanding of it. So it's important, but there would be a whole lot more work to do to, really say that they have this employability skill and are competent at it. If that was, some intention in the question.
It also, this particular question addresses the systems thinking category within the employability skills framework. And if anyone is interested in looking at that particular framework that we used for crafting, or for asking these questions, we can give out a website for looking at what that actual framework is and what systems thinking, what is being defined as systems thinking by the federal government.
Does that answer?
Follow that up. I think that does answer it. And since you mentioned that website, I just want to clarify for people who are on, that is when you have had orientation with us and we've had meetings at our conference, that is the framework that Tabitha is talking about, is the same one that we have shared with you a couple of times to help support families and learning employability skills, because that is kind of the federal government recognized framework. So it's a lot easier to use the same measure and the same system across. So there's another question in the box, ladies. Is there data indicating the increased use of public libraries in the report? number of library cards issued, and whether there was an increase in parents bringing their children to the library.
There is data, and Tabitha is going to report it in 1, 2.
Okay, so we do ask questions about library use. You know, specifically, there are several questions on the, and this is in the initial and the final interviews. We had a majority of participants indicated that they had a library card, that's 62%. And 43% indicated that their children had a library card.
In the initial interview.
In the initial interview, thank you, yes. And those numbers went up over the course of the year. So in the final interviews, that number went up to 77% of respondents indicated that they had a library card, and 59% indicated that their children did. So that's 59% up from 43. We also asked for the number that people to report the number of visits that they made to the library on a monthly basis. So during the initial interviews, 51% of respondents reported that they visited the library between 1 and 4 times a month. So the majority of people are going to the library with their children at least once a month. And then overall, we saw a drop of people who said that they never went to the library with their children, dropped from 40% in the initial interviews down to 23% in the final interviews. So we had, more parents going to the library with their children, that we saw that increase over the program year. This is pretty much similar to what we have seen in program years, where we have just slightly less than 50% of people indicating that they had, just at 50% of people indicating that they had library cards and they were attending the library with their children, to somewhere in the range of 60% attending at the end of, visiting the library at the end of their program year. So it's one of the reasons that wasn't necessarily highlighted in the presentation is the numbers that we're seeing are pretty much at par from the last 4 years. So that we're seeing, good increases certainly of people visiting the library and bringing their children with them. But that has remained relatively steady throughout the 4 years of the Toyota Family Learning Project.
I think we reported on the literacy activities and engagement because that spiked a little bit more this year.
Does that answer your question?
I think that probably does. And that's certainly in the report. The report, for those on the webinar with us, the report was included in the email you received from Emily so early in the month. I think it was right on the 2nd. So that report should be included. If you did not get a copy of it and you need that, please just let us know and we'll be happy to send it out. It looks like Tracy here at NCFL has a comment. So Tracy, I'm going to unmute you.
About systems thinking. The other thing I think,
Tracy,
yes.
I hate to interrupt you. I could hear you because I could hear you through the wall, but I think everyone else did not hear you until you got to systems thinking.
Oh, gotcha.
Don't mind to repeat yourself.
Thank you. No, I was just going to say, and again, I am not an evaluator or a researcher, but the question about systems thinking, I also think something that's really positive about that finding is that it speaks to your organization's effectiveness in helping families really begin to see how all of the components fit together, how academic achievement of the adult and then the child play into the adult's role as an employee and the whole family's role as community members. And that's something that NCFL very intentionally works very hard to do. And just honestly, not everyone always sees those connections. So I think it's a huge kudos to the organizations that we're working with, that's happening.
Thanks, Tracy. That's very helpful. Good observation.
I don't see any other hands raised or any other questions in the box, but we'll give it just a minute. I know in the past we've had partners who've said, "Can you give us just a little bit longer to type?"
Comments are okay too.
Yes.
Like Tracy's comment.
And we also know the report is over 200 pages long. And so we know it's a lot of information. We've distilled it down to just
200.
to 28 slides, 29 slides. And it's a lot of information we just threw at you. So understanding that some of that takes a little bit of time to process as well.
I would certainly encourage everyone also, the main report itself where everything is pulled together. You guys did a phenomenal job on that. It's very informative, and there are a lot of themes and trends that you can see. But in the appendix area, you also can see your individual programs data, and I certainly encourage you to take a look at that. I don't want to give any specific shout outs on here because it would be unfair to those I don't mention, because you all do such a great job. But there were some places when I was reading through the program specific data points that I thought, holy cow, what are they doing there that, that families are at such a high percentage talking to their children about their heritage, or here where parents and children are using technology together, every day of the week, almost every family. So I think it's a really great opportunity to see where things are kind of off the charts in your programs, as well as, always we're always looking for places to improve and to provide even better support to families. And I think that program specific data can be very rich for that purpose.
Should we go to the last slide?
I will do that now.
Or
next to last.
Second to last. Yes. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
We just want to do quick announcements for those who are current programs. I think this presentation and the report certainly reiterates the importance of sending that attendance. It is cumulative, so every month we can see how numbers are stacking up, but we go through and add up all of that data, and it really does form the basis for a big section of the report we do each year. So we just want to make sure that you're sending those attendances to both Carol and I by the 5th of the next month. So the next time you would send attendance to Carol and I would be February 5th, and you would send us the January attendance. It's also time to be sending us descriptive information. Now, some of you guys have, from some programs, we have a bunch of stuff already. We have photographs, and we have some narrative about some projects going on, and that is wonderful and spot on. Although I know at the end of the year, when we're compiling all of this and wading through all the material, we'll maybe wish that there was less of it. But for right now, we want more and more data that you guys can take time to send us. We appreciate it. So please be sending in that descriptive information on projects that are being done, the family service learning projects that are happening, as well as any other information about your program right now that is helpful. And then while we have you guys, we just wanted to let you know that we'll be closing the interviews and the logs on June 8th of this year. So those Survey Gizmo logs that you fill out, those will all be closed on June 8th, and you won't be able to add any other interviews. So if your program will not be finished by June 8th, please send an email to Carol and I as soon as possible to let us know, because we can extend those dates if needed for particular programs. And then the next slide has our contact, the last slide has our contact information if you want to copy that down.
Real quickly before I move there, Tabitha, while we're all still looking at this slide, I just wanted to mention who else to copy in on these things. I think everyone's doing a great job, but just to be sure, you should also be copying Deb Pogue at NCFL on attendance. And this is just, a greedy, we like to have it, but if you're sending in descriptive information, if you would copy your technical assistance coach, we would greatly appreciate that. We have regular meetings in the office, and we all like to be the one to be able to say, look, this is what's going on at my program. So if you'll copy your technical assistant when you send that descriptive information in, we would love to have those additional pictures and things to see as well.
Those are not self-portraits.
I was going to say, that looks just like me.
Yeah. It kind of has your haircut.
And,
yeah.
And there you are. Well, thanks everybody for, again, all your great work. And we learned so much from you. And we're excited to look at everything that you send us. And it's very helpful. So have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. And as you're preparing to click that X, also you want to note that this week, I think yesterday, in fact, the call for proposals for the Families Learning Conference opened for this year's conference that will be in September in Fort Lauderdale. So go on and start thinking about what you want to present and make sure that you get those proposals in. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks.